About how I came into journalism, what some of my struggles were, how I see the media has changed today, and what I'm doing right now. So, small story about role models and why they're so important. Not many of you may know that my mother was a journalist. And my mother was a journalist, her name was Prabha Dutt. And my mother was a journalist at a time when there were no women in journalism. So I grew up hearing this story from her when she was 19 years old. She graduated from college. She went to apply for a job, much like all of you. She went to journalism school in Punjab University. And she graduated and she went to the Hindustan Times, where I now have a column, to ask for a job. And the editor actually told her that there are no openings in the newsroom for women, and if you want a job, you'll have to cover the flower show. And this is how it used to be. And we actually forget how women of previous generations, have fought battles that have enabled our equality today and made it possible for us to be here today. So my mother and a few other women of her generation, they really had to fight to make their space in the Indian media world. And a lot of people think that I am India's first woman war correspondent, but actually, as it turned out, that distinction belongs to my mother. And I'll tell you a little story that I was brought up on. And I tell you these stories because I think it's so important to bring up our daughters on stories like these. In 1965, a war broke out between India and Pakistan. And my mother, by now an established voice in the Hindustan Times, went to the same editor and said, "I'd like to go to the war front to report the war." And the editor now said to her, "Are you mad? We can't send women to the war front." So she said, "Well, in that case, if you're not going to let me cover the biggest story that there is, then you may as well give me a few days off." So she took time off, and there was no television those days. She went with a notepad and a pen. She had a cousin in the army. She went alone, traveled alone to the war front, and sent dispatches back that the paper was then forced to publish. So she was literally India's first woman war correspondent. 30 years later, 30 years after that, more than 30 years after that, in 1999, I had a similar battle. I first had to plead with my bosses to let me go and cover the war. I said, "I can't report a war sitting in Delhi." Then I had to plead with the military. The military said that we can't make any special arrangements for you. So I said, "What special arrangements? Why do you think I would need something special?" And they said, "There's no place to sleep. There may not be any food. There are no bathrooms." This really bothered them, that there are no bathrooms. So I said, that's fine. I understand that it's a war. I was quite young though, I was in my 20s. But I never had any exposure to covering conflict before. But I understood that, if you go into a war zone, you can't demand room service and, clean bathrooms and towels to come with it. So I said, I'll go behind a rock or under a tree or in the field just like the guys. And that is, in fact, what I did. And, but why I'm sharing this story with you is that at every stage, you think the battles are over. But at every stage, even 3 decades later, I was in a sense pleading for my place at that war front, for my right as a woman to report that story. And although I got a lot of accolades, and that was really in a sense what made me a national name, the experience of reporting that war, I also have to say that I did have a father. My mother died when I was 13. I did have a father who let me go and cover that story. And I have met any number of young girls, or young women, I should say, who have dreams, and their dreams are curtailed by protective parents. Their dreams are curtailed by protective teachers. The intentions are good. The intentions are to protect you. But actually, I call them chains of gold, because you're actually shackling women from pursuing their dreams. And I was lucky and fortunate, and I did not realize how unusual it was that I grew up in a home where I was never asked, "When will you get married?" I never did get married. I was never asked, "Don't you want children?" It's not that my father was absolutely comfortable. He was terrified. And please remember that when I reported the Kargil war, there was no live broadcasting, there were no mobile phones, there was no phone communication possible. So I could not even speak to my family and say that I was safe. But the fact that I was allowed that level of freedom, I think what our young women need more than anything else is the freedom to dream and the freedom to execute those dreams. And sometimes what holds our women back is, of course, misogyny, patriarchy, inequality. But sometimes what holds our women back is overprotecting them. And I know it's difficult. I know it's difficult because parents have a lump in their throat and a knot in their stomach. And I'm sure my father did as well. And not just in Kargil, many times after. I spent 20 years reporting conflict. I've counted more dead bodies and seen more bomb blasts and seen more violence, riots, floods. I traveled literally alone with a producer of mine to Egypt and Libya when the regimes were falling there during the Arab Spring. So I've always been an adventure seeker. And nothing has made me happier than being that vagabond out in the field, which is my first love. But I have seen and worked with so many women who have been unable to fulfill their dreams. And they've been unable to fulfill their dreams because either their family has prioritized getting married over their careers, or they are expected to perform duties at home that their brothers are not. They're expected to be the people to step up to look after their parents. They're expected to be the people to take the inordinate responsibility of raising the children. There are girls who get married